Adam Schiff leaned forward, his voice sharper than the room expected. He called Senator John Kennedy unpatriotic, a word that carried weight, a word designed to wound. The chamber stilled. Eyes darted between them, waiting for Kennedy to flinch. But Kennedy didn't move. Instead, he placed a single sheet of paper on the table, a classified date, one that Schiff had prayed would never leave the shadows. And in that instant, everyone in the room knew this wasn't going to be routine. If you want to see moments like this, raw, unfiltered, and unforgettable, make sure you subscribe right now. The chamber didn't need a spark that day. It was already a storm waiting to break. Senators shifted in their chairs, aides hovered too close with folders they weren't supposed to show, and the press gallery seemed hungrier than usual. Adam Schiff entered calm, clipped, polished. His name alone carried baggage, whispers of leaks, late-night headlines, and 1,000 half-remembered reports that lived longer than the hearings themselves. He knew it, everyone knew it, and then John Kennedy walked in. No folder tucked under his arm this time, no stack of notes, just that slow, deliberate walk that made people lean forward. He didn't need props. His silence was louder than any briefing packet. The gavel cracked, the chairman cleared his throat, but the room had already tilted. Schiff's eyes flicked toward Kennedy once, then back to his papers. It was quick, but not quick enough. The cameras caught it. The aides noticed it. The chamber wasn't neutral ground anymore. It was a battlefield dressed in marble. And when Kennedy adjusted his microphone, everyone knew he wasn't here to play at courtesy. This wasn't going to be another polite exchange. This was going to be about loyalty and about leaks. The senator leaned back, his voice low, measured, deliberate. It wasn't fire. It wasn't accusation. Not yet. Instead, Kennedy's words were shaped like curiosity, but weighted like a trap. Congressman Schiff, he began, the chamber still adjusting to his tone. On what date did you first see the briefing that's now the talk of every closed hallway? No raised voice, no finger pointing, just a question. But the way he phrased it, not if he saw it, but when, cut through the silence like steel. Schiff shifted in his seat, papers shuffled, a glance downward then back up. He had expected a fight. He had prepared for loudness, for slogans, for Kennedy's accent playing foil to a polished rebuttal. He had not prepared for this, because this wasn't a question designed for an answer. It was a statement disguised as curiosity. It placed him in the story before he could even deny it. It drew a timeline around him without his consent. For a moment, Schiff smiled, trying to play it casual, but the room didn't move with him. Staffers stopped typing. Reporters angled their phones higher. A question that didn't sound like a question had made the temperature drop. And Kennedy, still calm, added just enough weight to let everyone know the silence wasn't accidental. The silence lingered until Kennedy moved. Slowly, without fanfare, he reached into the folder resting on the desk in front of him. No theatrics, no rustling, just the steady pull of a man who knew exactly what page was waiting for daylight. Reporters leaned forward. Even Schiff's aides leaned just slightly out of instinct, as if the angle of a paper could mean survival. Kennedy laid it flat. Not a binder, not a stack. A single file, marked with a date in handwriting that looked ordinary until you realized what the numbers meant. Here's what I don't understand, Kennedy said, tapping the page once with a finger. This briefing, the one circulated on February 12th, that's a Monday. That's 3 days before your public statement dismissing any concern about it. Congressman, are we supposed to believe you hadn't seen this page yet? It wasn't thunder. It was worse. It was quiet precision. Schiff's lips parted, ready to shape a denial, but the file sitting under the chamber lights made words heavy. Camera zoomed closer. Kennedy didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to, because the date on that page was louder than anything a senator could shout. And for the first time that morning, the confidence in Schiff's posture gave way. Shoulders tightened. The smirk that carried him through 100 hearings faded into something the cameras caught, and the audience recognized. The file Kennedy brought hadn't just changed the conversation, it had changed the air. Schiff leaned forward, finally trying to steady the ground beneath him. His staff passed a folded note, the kind of lifeline only insiders knew how to slip across the table without being seen. He glanced at it, nodded, and lifted his eyes back toward Kennedy. Senator, you're mischaracterizing, Schiff began, but Kennedy was already shaking his head, calm and unhurried. Congressman, I didn't write this date, he said, his finger still resting on the file. It wasn't my staff who circulated this. It was yours. So before you accuse me of mischaracterizing, maybe explain how your own words, your own signature, ended up at the top of this page. The chamber snapped to attention. There was no script for this. Schiff had walked into the hearing ready with polished talking points, phrases tested and timed. But Kennedy had chosen something simple, the one exchange that couldn't be prepped for. Schiff's mouth tightened, searching for an angle. That's not the full context, he muttered. Kennedy let the silence drag, letting the cameras do their work. Then give us the context, he replied, softer than before. We're waiting. That pause stretched longer than anyone thought it would. Schiff adjusted his microphone, shuffled the papers in front of him, but the explanation didn't come. The kind of hesitation that doesn't read as caution, it reads as being cornered. The exchange wasn't loud, it wasn't theatrical, but it was raw, unscripted, and live. And in that moment, everyone watching understood. This was the question Schiff didn't have in his notes, and the answer he couldn't give on camera. The chamber by now had shifted into a different mood. What began as a measured exchange between Schiff and Kennedy had turned into a room no longer watching procedure, but spectacle. Cameras stayed locked. Aides leaned closer. The murmur of journalists grew into a low hum. Schiff tried to seize the floor with his usual gravitas. He gestured toward the Constitution as if to anchor himself in the nation's framework. His voice carried that attorney's cadence, the kind that once held hearings under his full control. But Kennedy didn't lean back this time. He leaned in. On the table before him sat the file. Not thick, not dramatic in appearance, just a few clipped pages, but weighty enough to shift the entire center of gravity. Congressman, Kennedy said evenly, I'd like you to explain this date right here. He turned the page around, camera zoomed. Schiff hesitated, his lips parted, but no sound filled the pause. The silence became its own headline. Schumer, seated just behind, tried to cut in. That document isn't the issue. But Kennedy raised a hand not to silence Schumer, but to point directly at Schiff. No, Chuck, Kennedy said softly. This is the issue. That was the pivot, the moment when control slipped entirely out of the majority's grasp. Schiff's practiced rhythm broke. His brow furrowed, and he looked not at Kennedy, but past him, toward aides, toward papers, toward anything but the date on the page. The gallery leaned forward. Phones flashed. The committee that thought it was orchestrating the script was suddenly hostage to the one detail Kennedy had been waiting to release. And that date, one line typed clean on government letterhead, carried more weight than Schiff's hours of rebuttal. The crossfire wasn't just between two men anymore. It was between what was spoken in front of cameras and what had been sealed in classified ink. The room for a moment belonged wholly to Kennedy. The silence after Kennedy's reveal wasn't just dead air, it was weight. The kind of weight that pressed into every inch of the room until even the ceiling lights seemed to burn hotter. Schiff leaned forward, his lips parting, searching for a thread of language to pull, a phrase that could rescue him. But the words wouldn't line up. His staffers shifted in their seats, their pens still now, their eyes darting as though they could will him to conjure something that would cut the tension. Kennedy didn't move. He just sat back, hands folded, eyes steady. The posture of someone who already knew the room belonged to him. And in that stillness, Schiff's pause grew longer, more brittle, until it was no longer silence. It was exposure. Finally, Schiff spoke. His voice cracked slightly, pitched higher than before. This is out of context. You can't, Senator, this isn't, classified documents aren't, but it was too late. The words stumbled, broken, collapsing under the weight of their own incompleteness. Every half start only deepened the impression that he wasn't in control. Kennedy leaned in then, the first real movement in minutes. His drawl cut slow, deliberate. Congressman, I didn't ask for your commentary. I asked for your answer. The gallery erupted, not in shouts, but in a kind of collective exhale, the kind that carried with it a recognition of what had just happened. This wasn't partisan jousting anymore. This was one man demanding accountability and another man visibly, audibly failing to provide it. The cameras caught everything. Schiff's eyes blinking too fast, his hands shifting papers he wasn't reading, his throat working around a sentence that wouldn't come. And in the control rooms, producers whispered the same thought. This was the clip that would loop for days, replayed, dissected, replayed again. It wasn't just that Kennedy had landed a blow. It was that Schiff couldn't find the floor to stand on afterward. The chamber was hushed. Kennedy leaned in, not with volume, but with weight. Patriotism, he said, isn't measured by how loud you accuse. It's measured by whether your own dates match your own words. No one moved. The line didn't need to be explained. It didn't need to be repeated. It settled like a gavel, final, unanswerable. The cameras cut, but the silence stretched on. Schiff's papers sat still, unread, as if even he knew what had just happened would outlive the day. And here's where I'll leave you. America doesn't replay the shouting. It replays the sentence that made the shouting stop. So let me ask you, was Kennedy right to corner Schiff this way? Or do you think Schiff was unfairly put on trial in front of the whole country? Drop your thoughts below. I'll be reading them. And if you think this exchange was sharp, you'll want to see what happened in the last clash. Chuck Schumer tries to cut Kennedy off. Kennedy reads his own words back. Click that and stay with us.